Golfers are apparently notorious for betting on just about anything and everything about their game. They bet on their score for the entire game, their scores after 9 holes, who would do better on a particular hole, who would have the longest drives or putts, how long it would take someone to get out of a sand trap, and so on. Essentially any and every outcome in the game could be bet on, and Titanic wanted to get in on that action. To that end, Titanic, who already owned a set of golf clubs, also now purchased a new left-handed set as well, because he intended to approach golf just like he approached any other physical task he wanted to master. So, just like he had tossed countless cards until he could reliably throw them into a hat from across a room at will, and just like he had perfected his dice-throwing motion so he could get some fairly reliable results, Titanic started practicing golf constantly. Part of this then involved the left-handed Titanic mastering the game both right and left-handed. He was careful though to do his practicing discreetly and out of sight of the other golfers, while also doing his best to stay in the shade and wear long-sleeve shirts to ensure that he didn't develop a tan and look like someone who had spent day after day practicing his golf game. Reportedly, Titanic spent an entire year practicing constantly before he decided he was ready to play for real. He didn't start off small either, but instead targeted a golf pro who worked at one of the city's courses named Buddy Brainer, who, in addition to his day job on the golf course, also liked to spend his evenings hanging out at the Kingston Club, which was how Titanic knew of Buddy because all the other card players considered Brainer to be the best golfer in town. Buddy then was the perfect target for someone like Titanic, as he was a man that everyone believed couldn't be beat, so when he did go down, Titanic was sure to clean up. So, once Titanic was confident in his own skills, he began baiting the hook one night as he got the golf pro to talk about how good he was and to tell stories about some of the games he had won. Yet, unlike Buddy's normal audience, Titanic did not seem all that impressed. Instead, he called golf a child's game. In fact, the way he figured it, he could probably be quite the golfer himself if he tried. Insulted, Buddy then challenged the gambler to come and play a round of golf with him. Titanic was in, and he was so confident that he offered to play the pro for money. Buddy then suggested they play for $10 a hole, and so the pair faced off the next morning. It was here that Titanic really looked to set the hook, as he played the first timer to a tee as he hit the ball wildly. In fact, he even reportedly pretended not to know how to stand when putting, thus requiring his opponent to actually come to his aid. As a result, the golf pro easily won every hole as Titanic acted like a sore loser, complaining about bad clubs, a stiff back, and just about any other excuse in the book. For his part, after their game, Buddy was encouraging, saying that all Titanic really needed was practice. Yet, when Titanic purposely arrived late at the Kingston Club that night, it was apparent from his reception from his fellow gamblers that Buddy had told them all about his poor showing out on the course. The others then were said to have taken great enjoyment at his expense. As they did so, Titanic seemed to get angrier and angrier, until finally he had enough and declared he just had a bad day. Given another chance, he insisted, he could beat the smug Buddy. In fact, he challenged the golf pro to another game, this time for real money, $1,000 a hole, provided Buddy spot him 3 strokes a hole. Buddy wouldn't go that far and instead offered 1 stroke a hole, to which Titanic promptly accepted. Now for Buddy, this had the makings of an easy $18,000 or more than $300,000 today. Meanwhile, a number of the other gamblers in attendance that night also wanted in on the action and began laying their own bets, with Titanic accepting all bets against his success personally, meaning that if he lost, not only would he owe Buddy $18,000, but he would also owe all these other gamblers whatever they bet as well. So, once again, Buddy and Titanic would meet on the golf course the following morning. This time with a number of the gamblers from the Kingston Club also in attendance to watch the match, fully expecting to see Titanic embarrassed by the young golf pro. Yet, unlike the previous day's adventure when Titanic's ball seemed to go everywhere but onto the course, on this day his first drive was perfect. In fact, it was said to have gone a good 50 yards past Buddy's drive. It was then at that point that the golf pro began to suspect that something was up. A feeling that would only be confirmed as the man who was supposedly playing his second golf game ever won hole after hole over the pro. Sure, he was partially aided in this by a single stroke advantage, but even with that it was clear that Titanic's performance the day before had all been for show. By the end of the day, Titanic would walk away some 56 grand richer, while Buddy was now in debt and in trouble with a number of the gamblers who had bet on his success. This was just the beginning. Among Titanic's other victims on the golf courses of California was bootlegger Ed Marsh. Now, when dealing with Marsh, Titanic would play possum a bit differently, as the two would play daily for weeks with Titanic always winning, but just barely doing so. He kept this up until one day the Roman gambler started pushing the bootlegger's buttons, asking him why he even bothered playing golf when he was so bad. This was both insulting and confusing for Marsh, as sure Titanic regularly beat him, winning a couple $100 each time, but their games were generally fairly close. Despite this, Titanic didn't let up, as he insisted that the bootlegger couldn't play worth a lick. In fact, he was so bad Titanic was willing to bet $1,000 he could beat Marsh playing left-handed. Marsh, insulted and confident he was about to get one over on his suddenly arrogant opponent, raised the bet to $10,000. Unfortunately for Marsh, as previously stated, Titanic was left-handed, and so he easily beat his opponent since he was actually a better golfer playing left-handed. To cover these losses, the bootlegger had to sell Titanic a house in Beverly Hills. It was at this point, after nearly a year in California, that Titanic called Alice to tell her to sell their house in Pittsburgh so she could come and join him in sunny California. Alice, for her part, was said to be very much excited, as while her husband had called her from time to time, she had not actually seen him in person for nearly a year. Yet now here he was inviting her to come and join him in his new stomping grounds of California. Alice then sold their house, the money from which she gave to her parents, and set off for the West Coast, where her husband was waiting with a brand new Pierce Arrow of her own, a Derringer, a number of clothes, and diamond jewelry, all bought with his winnings, which seemed to be Titanic's way. He does not appear to have been an extremely affectionate husband and was rarely present, failings that he attempted to make up for with lavish gifts, which also may have been a way of making up for his serial infidelities that Alice seemed to have been well aware of. With his new home in Beverly Hills, Titanic looked to expand his hunting grounds beyond San Francisco into LA, so he bought a membership into the Hollywood Country Club. It was there that he would encounter George Von Elm, a cocky young golfer, who apparently had plenty of reasons to be cocky at this time, seeing as how he had just won golf's amateur title. George then, upon returning to the club after winning the title, would approach the newcomer he'd been hearing so much about. Word had it, you see, that this Titanic fellow seemed to think he was quite a good golfer. Indeed, from what George had heard, this stranger always seemed to be able to beat his opponent, if even just barely, which was more than likely true, as Titanic liked to be a showman and never looked to really embarrass his opponent, which, as much as anything else, may have been a part of his game to get even more money from his victim, as if he made it look like he had just barely beaten them, they would then be more likely to try again, regardless of how much money they had just lost. Von Elm then approached Titanic one day and suggested that the reason why someone as supposedly good as he was didn't participate in any tournaments was because he was too afraid to do so. Titanic naturally denied the accusation, at which point Von Elm suggested they pay for $100 a hole. In fact, he was even willing to spot Titanic 9 holes. He was so confident he could beat him easily. Titanic then took the bet, although he had no intentions of winning this game. Not because he intended to take Von Elm himself for more money, though. No, he had bigger prey in his sights. You see, it was well known that Von Elm was friends with a young up-and-coming millionaire who was starting to really make a name for himself in the film business. Titanic's real target then was none other than the 21-year-old Howard Hughes. Indeed, the primary reason he had joined the Hollywood Country Club in the first place was because he hoped to get Von Elm's attention and through him get access to the ridiculously wealthy Howard Hughes. Titanic's plan then was he would lose a couple of games to Von Elm. This would cost him several $1,000s, but in doing so, Hughes, who was himself a known golf fanatic, would hopefully be tempted to get in on the action. It would then be at that point that Titanic would strike, potentially earning his biggest score ever. Or at least that was the plan until he and Von Elm started playing, as reportedly Titanic took personal offense to the arrogant, uncaring way Von Elm approached their game. Sure, the gambler was purposely not playing up to his abilities, but the way in which his opponents seemed to be acting like all of this, and even Titanic himself were beneath him and his attention, got under the gambler's skin. It was at that point that Titanic seemingly forgot about the young millionaire and his plans, as instead he started playing for real. Golf's amateur champion then suddenly found himself in a real game. Now, I'm unsure about the math here, but according to both my sources, after 8 holes, the two were tied, having traded wins back and forth. A situation that they claim, thanks to Von Elm spotting Titanic 9 holes, meant that the amateur champ would have to win every hole from here on out to come out on top. As a result, when they came to the 9th hole and Titanic only had to make a 3-foot putt to win, while Von Elm had to make a 30-footer, the amateur champion, after considering his shot and what he had got himself into, simply threw his club down and stormed off, vowing revenge against the man he declared was a cheat. That revenge would appear a week later, when a man from Omaha arrived at the course to play a series of mediocre games, all the while betting a fair amount of money in the process. The man, who claimed to be in town visiting his sister and who reportedly had quite a bit of money to his name, seemed to be an easy mark. So when he and Titanic got to talking and the man from Omaha offered the roving gambler a chance to play for $100 a hole, Titanic saw his chance. The two then played a game where neither shot all that well, after which, before Titanic could make his move, the man from Omaha offered to play another game for $1,500. Now, whether Titanic recognized his own hustle or not is unclear. He either saw the trap and was so confident that he walked in knowingly, or he was so used to being the hustler that he never expected to be the one hustled. Regardless, it would quickly become clear as their match got started what was going on, as George Von Elm just happened to come striding up to watch the two play. The man from Omaha, you see, wasn't just some simple rube, but a golf pro who Von Elm had hired to come out to California and embarrass the traveling gambler. Yet, despite bringing in this ringer, Titanic would reportedly still win the day by a single stroke. Still, with the chance to go after Howard Hughes gone and the action in the Kingston club seemingly drying up, it seemed like it was about time to move on. Luckily, Titanic's friend Nick the Greek had an idea. You see, as he heard it, the place people like the pair of them should be heading to in those days was on the other side of the country, as if you wanted in on the hot action, you now had to be in New York City. Nick then would head out there first, but Titanic wouldn't be far behind. However, what trouble the pair of them got into in the Big Apple and Titanic's continuing gambling escapades will have to, for now, remain a story for another time.
Thank you for listening to Distorted History. If you would like to help out, please rate and review the podcast and tell your friends if you think they'll be interested. If you're feeling especially generous and would like to help keep this podcast going, please consider visiting my Ko-fi page at ko-fi.com/distortedhistory and donating a few bucks. Anything you can give is greatly appreciated. I will be posting updates on future episodes and sources there in addition to posting them on Twitter as I usually do. With all that being said, once again, thank you for listening, and until next time. Thank you for listening to Distorted History. If you would like to help out, please rate and review the podcast and tell your friends if you think they'll be interested. If you're feeling especially generous and would like to help keep this podcast going, please consider visiting my Ko-fi page at ko-fi.com/distortedhistory and donating a few bucks. Anything you can give is greatly appreciated. I will be posting updates on future episodes and sources there in addition to posting them on Twitter as I usually do. With all that being said, once again, thank you for listening, and until next time.